Unit 4.2. Sorry, I miswrote there. Page 168 through 171. Chapter 36. Woman, hold your tongue. Anne Hutchinson was another troublemaker. At least that is what some Puritans thought. Here was a woman with 14 children who was interpreting the Bible. No one objected to that until she began to question some of the minister's beliefs. Soon she was trying to reach everyone with her ideas about God. Governor Winthrop was outraged. Didn't Mistress Hutchinson have enough to do with all those babies to feed? What was worse, in Winthrop's view, was that people were listening to her. Even men were listening. There was a reason. Anne Hutchinson had a fine mind, and she loved God. Besides, what she was saying made sense. Winthrop admitted that she was a woman with a ready wit and bold spirit. Before long, Massachusetts was split between people who believed what Anne Hutchinson said and those who believed the minister. She claimed God was guiding her. The ministers said they were doing God's work on earth. Finally, the Puritans held a trial. You can read the court records for yourself. You may agree that Miss Hutchinson was smarter than her accusers, but that didn't help her a bit. She was kicked out of Massachusetts and out of the Puritan church, too. She moved to Rhode Island. Later, Anne Hutchinson moved to York and was killed by Indians. Governor Winthrop saw it as the judgment of God. In those days, women, like children, were expected to be seen but not heard. They belonged to their husbands. For the word for them was chattel. That means a piece of property. A husband could sell his wife's labor and keep the wages. If she ran away, she was accused of stealing herself and her clothing. Her husband even owned her clothes. I'm going to skip the record on 169 and go to 170. Anne Hutchinson wasn't the only strong woman to trouble John Winthrop and the Massachusetts Bay Puritans. Her best friend was a problem, too. Mary Dyer followed the ways of Anne Hutchinson. When Anne Hutchinson was cast out of Massachusetts, Mary Dyer and her husband William and other believers went with her. Later, Mary Dyer took a trip back to England and found other truths for herself. She became a member of the Society of Friends, the people who were known as Quakers. Quakers call their church services meetings. In a Quaker meeting, everyone is equal. Anyone may speak out, and there are no ministers. Now, in the 17th century, equality was not fashionable. Besides, Quakers refused to swear oaths of allegiance to anyone but God. But oaths of loyalty to king and country were expected in England and everywhere in the 17th century. You need to understand that the church and the government were all part of one package in the old world. It was the church that gave the king his rights to govern. It was called the divine right of kings. It was the government that gave the church support and lands. That was the way it had always been. It seems as if people like the Quakers wanted to mess things up. The Quakers believed in toleration, and they believed each person could think for himself. What happens if you let people think for themselves? Why, the next step might be for them to say that the king's church and the king's priests weren't needed. And Quakers did say something like that, and when they sat in their meetings without ministers. So maybe you can see why Quakers were hated and persecuted by the authorities in England. They weren't liked any better in the colonies. The magistrates of the Massachusetts Bay Colony passed harsh laws to keep them away, but that didn't stop them. Some Quakers seemed determined to be martyrs, and Mary Dyer was one of them. She came to Boston and was sent away. She came back. This time she was tried with 2 Quaker men, and all 3 were led to the gallows. The men were hanged, but at the last minute, Dyer was sent off to Rhode Island. She came back again. The Puritans tried Mary Dyer again. This time, they offered her life if she would leave Massachusetts forever. She refused. Mary Dyer was hanged on June 1st, 1660, on the Boston Common in front of where the State House stands today. Her death was too much for some Puritans. In 1661, the law was changed. Today, statues of Mary Dyer and Anne Hutchinson can be seen on the Common.